Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me on my YouTube channel. And this is going to be the first entry of where I talk about our autism journey. I say our by meaning myself and my boy-girl twins, and how we actually have gotten through this, where it started, what we've been through, what we're doing now, and what's to come. So I thought the best way to start it off would be kind of what I started seeing first. This is, I would say, one of the most common questions I'm asked about our autism journey. Excuse me. Well, I would start off with, let's preface this by talking about my kids are now 5. When they were about 18 months, everything up until then, they were right on schedule as far as the standards that the American Pediatric Association has set forth. They were always right on track. My son was a little bit physically ahead. He was strong as an ox. He was, rolling over, pushing up. He was doing push-ups at 5 weeks. It was crazy. So anyway, they were always developing right on schedule, and everything seemed to be going really great with them. They weren't really preemie, especially for twins. I delivered them at 38 weeks. My son met me in recovery. My daughter only spent 2 hours in the NICU for observation. So there weren't a lot of precursors going into anything that should cause, us to really pay attention to any specific details or anything to look out for. So around 18 months, I started seeing some peculiar behaviors with both of my kids. Mainly, it started with my daughter. And she developed this fixation on puzzles. She loved puzzles. So, even though she seemed a little younger than the age that's posted on the toy, sometimes there's wiggle room there. And I picked up some puzzles, some of the chunky wood puzzles that are really great for their hands to, use the pieces. Anyway, so she really loved them. So we picked up several. We ended up having this wonderful collection, might I add, of chunky wooden puzzles for her. And it got to where I would set up to 7 or 8 puzzles at a time, and I'd dump the pieces out. I'd mix them up like a salad, and I'd set the boards out. And in less than 2 minutes, this child would have these puzzles completed, really with no mistakes. And interestingly, she would be placing a piece in one thing, and while she was placing it, she was already looking at another one and going and looking at another, and she was constantly figuring it out before she even got there, which for 18 months, to me, that was very peculiar. That wasn't average. So, it just made me watch things a little closer with her. Right around then is when my son also started to have a little bit more fixation as far as anything that was electronic. We didn't do a lot of electronics, especially when they were around me, but we did have the TV going. And anytime that there was the television on, the whole world was non-existent. It was just what was going on the TV. And progressively that they were also not talking. They weren't even babbling at this point. And then this was right around when they would have nights where they would wake up just screaming, and I couldn't understand what it was. And if it wasn't one, it was the other. And sometimes I was back and forth. Sometimes I was sleeping just in the hallway or in the middle between their rooms, just to try and catch a couple of minutes of rest in between the screaming matches and trying to console them. I was told over and over they were ear infections, but what was odd to me is that they weren't ever holding their ears. The pediatrician would always ask, well, are they holding their ears, or, nothing. It was just screaming. But I was told it's ear infections, so let's get some medicine and all of these things that normally you would do to treat an ear infection. So, moving on. As the next few months progressed, they were becoming more and more reclusive. They never played with each other. Really, there was no interaction around this time. They could be in the same room and never even acknowledge the other one was there. There wasn't ever coming to me to ask for food or drink or anything. It was just, they would either go grab it, or they just didn't need it. And then if I presented it to them, they would suddenly down the whole thing. There was never interaction even with me really on that note. They also it got to where tucking in at night, even just cuddling, we always did a thing where I would rock with both of them before I would take them to bed. And that was just literally trying to hold on to a wild rabbit. It just didn't happen. And so we would, that became more and more something that we weren't able to do. And definitely no tucking in. There was no tucking in. Hugging was painful on their end, and it was painful for me as a mother to not be able to hug and hold my children. There would be, when I would come home from work, there wasn't really that greeting that really left quickly, and they would go to opposite ends of the room. My daughter, more and more, was constantly on the toes. Me, as a background in dance, a lot of people would say, oh, she's just going to be a dancer like her mommy. No, this wasn't really that. The heels were just not down. And that got us kind of into that 20-21 month area. And right around then, a little before then, is when I had them tested for a program it's called ECI, it's Early Childhood Intervention. And my son actually was approved for the program. My daughter was not on that program, evidently. And things could have changed since then, but when we were in it, they do kind of an average, and the children have to be a specific percentage delayed. They have to fall in that window. And because of some of my daughter's advancements, it took her average, I think it was around 3 points. Too much for her to qualify, but my son qualified. Well, what this did is that allowed a therapist to come into our house once a week to work with him one-on-one. Now, of course, when you have that situation, you've got 2 kids that are the same, the other one may want to take part. And they said, she would be lenient with me as far as if my daughter wanted to join in. She's not going to shoo her away, but the focus would be on my son because he was the one that was going to be getting services. And the great thing is that it actually was covered by our insurance. We didn't have to pay very much per month for it. There was a little bit out of pocket, but it was affordable. And when you have 2 kids that you're facing some concerns with, that's a huge blessing. So we started having a therapist come into the house, and it was funny because that was around March, and she would of course come in and they would fly to other areas. My son got a little bit better to start working with her, and right around then was also when my son stopped eating the vast majority of the foods that he consistently had been enjoying. And it was the stuff that I had made. We had always done, I started with their baby food. I was one of those moms. I was one of those moms where, we didn't do formula. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but, they were only on human milk until they were 13 months. We went to hemp milk after that. I made all their food, with baby food even. I enjoyed it. It was great. And even with the foods that they were eating, I pretty much cooked everything, put a lot of vegetable purees in there so that it would up their nutritional content, things of that sort. So these were things that he had consistently enjoyed for a period, for ever since he was eating solid foods. And suddenly, boom, he would not touch them. And it was very strange to me. Then it became that struggle of, what is he going to eat? I have to get some food down this child. What is he going to eat? And so all of this was kind of happening around the same time. So anyway, back to the therapy. She was coming, and it was consistently harder and harder for him to transition from one thing to the next, and especially adult-led activities. Holy Moses, you would have thought that you had ripped his leg off when he had to do something that you were asking him to do. And something fun. He was 20 months. It's not like I was asking him to go rake the leaves for 4 hours. I was just asking him, or she would just ask him to come and play with this puzzle or something. Complete, you have ripped my legs off, and now I'm going to make sure you know that I'm upset about it. So this went on for a while, and we were seeing some good progress with him as far as him, interacting a little bit better. Transitions were still rough, but he was getting better. There was still no talking. So one of the sessions, she was working with my son, and my goal was always to try and keep my daughter busy and engaged with me so that the therapist could really work with my son. And then you have that, moms have eyes in the back of their head and extra sets of ears. So I would always be listening kind of and watching what she was doing with him as much as I could to learn from her and to learn what they were doing, because I couldn't have 100% attention on them since I was trying to also keep my daughter engaged. And there was one of the times we were sitting there, and my daughter loved the alphabet. She loved the alphabet. Everything was always alphabetical. Everything was always in color. My son was always lining things up. So, these are all flags. And I was sitting there and we were putting her alphabet magnets on the door. And I was watching the therapist, and then I turned around and the word cup is spelled on my door. C-U-P. Cup. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, I didn't do that. Nobody else is sitting here. And I said, oh my gosh, you just spelled cup. And she looked at me and smiled, which she made eye contact. Oh, hello. And then the therapist looked up and looked over, and she goes, did she just do that? I said, yes, she did. And so I looked at my daughter and I said, do you want something to drink? And she ran into the kitchen. So this was before there was talking, communication. She was already spelling words, and that I thought was peculiar, for sure. So as the weeks progressed, I was talking to the therapist one day, and she said, have you had any diagnostic work done? And I said, no, but I really need to. I know that I need to get it done. I need to get some things documented. I just want some answers, and I want to kind of rule some things out. And she says, I'm not a diagnostician. I said, I know, and I'm not going to ask you to say anything that you're not comfortable with. And I said, but, the hairs on the back of my head stand up when I've been researching one area of concern. And she said, so you've been looking into some things? And I said, yes. And she says, can I just, off the record, kind of just give you another thing to kind of look into? I said, absolutely. And she said, just kind of read up on PDD and OS. And I said, okay, I will. Sure enough, she leaves, kids go down for their nap, and I am on that computer immediately. And I'm starting to read more and more about it, and I thought, golly, this is just so spot on in so many ways. So we had an appointment with the pediatrician. I discussed my concerns. And of course, each time I had seen them before then, I had always voiced my concerns. I'm not one that really keeps my mouth closed very easily. And I was kind of foo-fooed off. I wouldn't worry about it, all kids develop differently. Of course they do. I get that. But there's some really things that are glowing in the dark at me in my eyes. Oh, you're just some, overreacting mom, and you're just cuckoo. Okay. So I ended up getting my daughter retested for the program. And that was also, it just worked out. That was at the same time that my son was approved for speech therapy. So when my daughter got approved, that meant that the therapist would be able to work with both of them. And that also was around the same week that the speech therapist was scheduled to start coming. Oddly, that was right around the time that the main therapist that had been with us for so long was going to be gone for 2 weeks. 1 week was for surgery, and the second week was with Thanksgiving. And her day that she came, I believe, was on a Thursday. And so she wasn't going to be there, of course, on Thanksgiving Day. And so this was a huge blessing. I was going to be able to get a second therapist to come in, and more eyes on my kids, more feedback for me, more things that I could learn to do to help my children. And I had also right around then seen a post from a dear friend of mine posting about some natural supplement that she had been using for her daughter who was diagnosed ADHD, and they had been struggling for a while, and they had seen great results. I had started studying natural health and that whole, just lump it up as that whole world, in the 90s. And when people thought I was crazy anyway, which, okay, I am, but they really thought I was ridiculous for studying it. Well, now I'm so thankful that I have all of these years of knowledge that kind of make this not so foreign, and it's not all brand new. Of course, there's a lot of brand new out there, but it's not all brand new for me. So I can really understand a lot of it. And when I read up on this supplement and the ingredients and some of the experiences people had, I thought, you know what, let's just give it a shot. I called the pediatrician, I did, and I said, listen, I just want to know if any of these ingredients, send a red flag up for you. I don't want to lecture. I just want to know if any of this would be a concern for my children who are 2. And they said, no, everything looks good. So, and actually, I should rephrase that. We were tested into the program when they were 18 months. We started right around when they were 2. So, and that was in March, right before they turned 2. And then we ended up, it was October, November of that year when we started this. And that was right when that therapist was gone, when I got the word from the pediatrician and the pharmacist to let me know that they didn't see anything that made them nervous. So I started them on the supplement. The next week, the speech therapist came for her first visit, and first visit's kind of like them getting to see what's going on. She had already read the files, but she needed to kind of see where my kids were, what was going on with them, interact a little bit just to get her, a little more knowledge of the situation. And then the second week she came, was on a Monday, and she really dove in. She was great. She had her bag that she came with all of her things to work with the kids. And that day, my son tended to go ahead and take to the magic bag. It was like Felix and the magic bag completely. But her name wasn't Felix. So she gets the bag. My son dove in. So I thought, okay, well, I'll work with my daughter. I'll spend some time with her until the therapist was ready to trade. And so she worked with my son a little bit, and then he was kind of done, and then my daughter ran over. It was real easy. They just kind of did it themselves. And I was sitting with my son, and as she's working with my daughter, my son and I are playing, and he looks at me, and he says, help. He actually said the word. And it was the first time he had spoken. And I tried to be really cool about it and didn't want to make a big deal just because I didn't want to scare him, because I honestly wanted to jump up and do toe touches and high kicks all over the place. And I said, oh, you want help? And he shook his head, and he did really good with sign language for a while. And then I said, okay, well, what do you want help with? And I grabbed it from, then he looked at me, and I gave him what he wanted, and then he said more. And I was like, oh my gosh, the second word. And right around then is when I saw the therapist kind of sit up, and she looked over at me and she goes, did he just say that? And I said, yeah, he did. And so we kept going, and I'm still trying to play it cool. And then I sat down with her and we talked over some things, and then she left. And as she was walking out, he walked over and he said, bye. So within that hour, he had said 3 words for the first time. It was almost 2.5. So at that point, I knew that we really needed to dive in and to get further. They were going to be turning 3 soon, and in that program, they had to graduate. And at graduation, they were supposed to test into the preschool. And so that was coming up very soon. And so we wanted to really prepare for that. The therapist came back that next Thursday. Both kids ran over and greeted her, hugged her on her legs instead of running to opposite ends of the room. And they said hi, and she honestly just stopped and looked at me and started tearing up, and I'm a train wreck by then. And she said, I was only gone 2 weeks, right? And I said, yeah. And she goes, what has happened? What is going on? And pretty much, to just say the least, therapy was minimal that day because we were both in tears and talking about some things and of that sort. So I'm going to stop there for this edition, and I'll pick up from where I've left off on the next installment. So, please make sure to comment below with any feedback you have, any questions. I'm just a mom. I'm not a medical doctor, but I am an educated mom, and I'm continuing my education at all times. So I'm just going to post about our journey, and on this channel I'm going to post about some other topics in which I'm also well versed. So please give me feedback, and make sure to always check into my Facebook. It is Brandy, Brandye, and Burris, Burris. I do a lot of Facebook Live on there, and then you can always find me on Snapchat with the way my name is spelled, Brandy10, or on Instagram where it's Brandy with _Y_E. So I hope to see you guys on some of my other pages, and no matter what, thank you in advance for subscribing to this, and I wish you all love, light, and many blessings. Bye.